Okay, so Unit 7.1, Part 2 of our snow reprieve here. We're going to get into our isms today, and really the main topic of this unit is going to be those isms, starting out with conservatism and repression. During this time period. In your note guides, when I get them to you, hopefully I'll get to see you all Monday and Tuesday, you're going to have a huge section of charts broken into the isms, broken into what each nation is doing with these isms at the time. You're going to have a chart on each ism, so a chart just for conservatism, a chart for nationalism, a chart for liberalism, a chart for socialism, so I wasn't kidding about the isms. And then you're going to have a 19th century political study guide by these isms. So it's going to go like England, France, Germany, Austria, Italy, Poland, Russia, and what each of them was doing in each area. So like England, conservatism, we're going to see with corn laws, again, and things like that. So these charts are going to be very important for you studying, just as important, if not more important, moving forward as the French Revolution charts. So the first thing that we need to talk about with conservatism is why did it arise, and why is it so important in this time period? And conservatism was a reaction to liberalism. It was a reaction to look what we did, look what happened when we let all of these liberals out of the bottle, let the genie out of the bottle. I mean, we have violence and terror and the guillotine. And so it becomes a very popular alternative for those frightened by the violence, terror, and social disorder of the French Revolution. But it's really just a form of repression. Like, we are going to repress you. We are going to tell you what to do to try to prevent these things from happening again. And our embodiment of conservatism is Clemens von Metternich of Austria, and we've talked about him several times here, pictured to the right. Born into his status in life, he is going to marry, the right person, gain the right titles politically and socially. During the time of Napoleon, 1809, is going to be the foreign minister of Austria, and he is going to really try to appease Napoleon. If you know what appeasement means, he's going to try to just like keep him happy. Napoleon's at his height right here. He just doesn't want to come under his radar. He's going to do what it takes to make him happy, to try to protect himself politically. I mean, he is a guy that people would say has a lot of confidence. He is very self-assured. He thinks he is superior to others and does not seek out others' approval. He does not care, very self-secure in his policies. He, during the time of Napoleon, is going to actually arrange the marriage of Napoleon to Marie Louise, the daughter of the Austrian Holy Roman Empire's emperor. And so he's going to set that up. He plays his cards very well. In 1812, however, he is going to start to be less pro-France, less appeasing of France, and this comes during that time period after Napoleon has lost to Russia, and this is where he is going to really focus his politics on the Bourbons and trying to bring back that status quo and getting the Bourbons back on the thrones that they have been usurped from by Napoleon. He is going to encourage a system that there's a monarchy and an aristocracy and then a set of respectful commoners. And so he is going to say that this is the way things need to be set up. There need to be entitled people, that there needs to be a monarch on the throne, there needs to be an aristocracy, all these people with titles and wealth like him, and then there needs to be the group of everyone else that needs to be respectful commoners, not people going against their monarch and causing all of this havoc. So he's really the opposite side of liberalism. Like liberalism would have said everyone is equal. He's the opposite of that. There should be set up classes. He's going to say that the liberals or the bourgeoisie were responsible for all of the terror during the French Revolution, that they had stirred up the poorer classes and gotten Europe into all of this trouble. So he has a very elitist viewpoint. And he's pretty much going to believe that there should be the haves and the have-nots, and that the haves should be the ones that have the responsibility of voting and doing other things with government. He's kind of going to say there's some people too dumb to vote, is what he thinks, and so that there need to be this separation of powers. He's supported by the traditional ruling classes, so like the nobles are going to be supporting him, the aristocracy, and peasants who still form the majority of the population. Bourgeoisie the liberals are going to constitute the biggest threat to his conservative status quo, and that's the group that he really dislikes, because he believes in order, society, and the state, and faith and tradition. And so just he is conservatism. Like, if you bottled him up, put his picture next to conservatism in the dictionary, that is Metternich. Okay, so next we're going to get an individual we've talked about before during the French Revolution. That's Edmund Burke, 1729 to 1797. Gave us his work, Reflections on the Revolution in France. You know, kind of his prophetic writing that had, you know, kind of said, this is going to be bad. Like, this liberalism in France is going to be bad. He said very early, like, was it 6 months into the French Revolution, before anything even got crazy, that this is going to end really bad. And he needs to be talked about with conservatism here, because he is one of the greatest intellectual defenses of European conservatism. He defended inherited privileges, okay, so that elitist viewpoint that you should have these privileges, there should be the upper group. He defended those, especially those of the English monarchy, and the aristocracy. I mean, he was from England, and so he really had a role in saying, you know, it should be done like England. It should be slow. Like, let's give like these 3 people over here the right to vote, but let's not go crazy and let everybody vote. Like, it's got to be slow. It's got to be calculated. It's got to be gradual. His work, remember, had predicted anarchy and dictatorship in France as a result of the French Revolution. So, I mean, he was pretty right on. And saying that so early on, it's not like he was coming during the time period and saying it happened. He had predicted it was going to happen. And so he is going to be one of the greatest intellectual minds to back up this conservative movement. He denounced political philosophy based on abstract principles of right and wrong. Okay, he's going to say that there are all these different shades of gray within there, and we have to do what's best for the country, and that it's going to be slow and gradual. Believe that nations should be shaped by national circumstance, national history, and national character. But Metternich here, you know, in comparison to that viewpoint, was particularly concerned about the multi-ethnic character of the Habsburg Empire. Remember, in the Habsburg Empire, we had like Germans and Czechs, I mean, all kinds of different people. And he saw like nationalism as particularly a huge concern and threat to tearing an empire apart. And so we're going to differ a little bit here. Like, Metternich is going to use conservatism to repress nationalism and liberalism during this period of 1815 to 1849. And so he is going to be very concerned about it from his conservative viewpoint. Edmund Burke going to say that, you know, there should be aristocracy and privileges, but he has a little bit more of like nationalism, and that comes from being from England, you know, in an area where lands hadn't, with other ethnic groups, hadn't as much been brought in. And so just a little bit of difference there. And so moving into that concern for the multi-ethnic composition of the Habsburg Empire meant that liberalism and nationalism were potentially more dangerous there than in other countries, and this is what Metternich is concerned with. Liberalism and nationalism were often centered in universities in the first half of the 19th century. If you think about that, I mean, where do you go to learn things? Where do new ideas come out? And it's in the universities. And so what's going to happen is Metternich is going to call the Carlsbad Diet in 1819. You remember that word just means like a meeting, a coming together to talk. And his purpose here is to keep liberalism out of Austria. How is he going to keep liberalism out of Austria? He realizes that you have to keep it out of Germany too. And so he is going to give us the Carlsbad Decrees in 1819, and they cracked down on liberalism in universities and drove liberalism and nationalism underground. How do they do this? Well, the decrees are going to outlaw liberal ideas. I mean, if you're a teacher at one of these universities and you start to teach about liberal ideas like Enlightenment, or like we should all be equal and you should all have the right to vote, that teacher's going to be fired. They're going to outlaw certain student organizations. What are those students doing in those meetings? Are they trying to rally? They're going to put like little student spies in there to spy on what's going on and disband these groups if they're, you know, talking about anything liberal. We're going to get censorship of what people can say, of what news articles can be published. Nothing nationalistic or liberalistic can be printed. It has to be approved, you know, under these decrees before it can go out. Materials that advocated unification are going to be censored. Remember, and we're going to get into our next slide here, the German Confederation. If Germany came together in, like, you know, one big Austria, Germany. This is going to put a lot of those new rulers out of a job, and that's the opposite of what Metternich wants. He wants a reawakening of that status quo of the old way of life. And so liberalism and nationalism he sees as the biggest enemies to his cause. And so how does conservatism show itself in some of these nations at the time? Well, we're going to get the German Confederation, or the Bund. Bund, it's said both ways. In Germany, its purpose was to guarantee the independence of the member states, or these German states. And so they're going to guarantee the independence of each of these individual states, but not come together. Yeah, it's kind of like it's a confederation government. If you think of like a U.S. history last year, you had the Confederation of the United States, the first 13 but independent states who had their own laws. So that's what we're seeing here in Germany. And it was a joint action to preserve all German states from domestic disorder. And the organization of the government was a diet, or an assembly, and it was presided over by Austria as president. And so we have a confederation government in Germany to react conservatively here. In Prussia, we're going to be seeing the rule by the Hohenzollern dynasty, a very aggressive royal family. Briefly after 1815, German liberals will see Prussia as a leader of German liberalism because of liberal reforms the government enacted after its defeat by Napoleon. However, these reforms have been designed to improve efficiency of government rather than to promote liberalism. So while they might have been seen as liberalistic in other areas, they were actually just trying to improve the efficiency of the government. So the Prussian government and its traditional ruling classes, the Junkers, who we've talked about before, will follow Metternich's lead in repressing liberal and nationalistic movements. So we have Prussia resisting liberalism and nationalism. We have Germany resisting it through its use of a confederation. And then we need to talk about Britain, which I forgot to put a slide in here about that. But it's going to be short, and then we'll get on to our next slide. So Britain, the parliament is going to be run by the conservative Tories. These are the Tories who had defeated Napoleon. They now control the government. And they are really just the forerunners of the party today in England, or the Conservative Party. And so the Tories are very conservative. They, if you remember, we talked about the Corn Laws of 1815. They are going to put these in place, which halt the importation of cheaper foreign grains. They're going to put high tariffs on grains coming in from other nations, trying to stop grains coming in from other areas. And what these corn laws really do is they are going to benefit the wealthy landowners at the expense of the rest of the English population. So who does this tick off? This is going to tick off the liberals. They are going to be outraged because the corn laws only benefit the rich class while at the expense of everyone else. And so very conservative here with the corn laws. And so the liberals, however, are going to lack necessary political influence because the Tories are in power to repeal the corn laws. So what do they have left to do? They're going to cause protests. They're going to have petitions. They're going to, start stirring stuff up. And this is going to tick off the conservative Tories in power. And they are going to give us something. The Tory Parliament are going to pass the 6 Acts. ACTS. So the 6 acts are going to give us things like no freedom of assembly. Hey, guess what? You guys can't get together and protest. You don't have freedom of assembly anymore. No freedom of the press. No putting out your liberalistic ideas and pamphlets. All of these things, if you remember, have been in place since 1689 under the English Bill of Rights. So they're going to take these away. They're also going to take away habeas corpus. And remember, habeas corpus is that right to trial. And they're going to take it away, repeal it for the first time in English history. I mean, since it was put in place in 1215. And this is really a reaction against these liberals who are protesting and petitioning. And so these liberals are going to continue to protest and give petitions. They're really ticked off not only by the corn laws now, but against these repealing of the rights that they had held. And that is going to lead us into our next slide, the Peterloo Massacre. So here we have all of these people angry, these liberals angry, and so we have a pro-liberal crowd in 1819 at the Peterloo Massacre. And so what's going to happen is we have this pro-liberal crowd listening to anti-corn law rhetoric. They are there. They have, like signs, they are gathered, they are breaking, like one of the 6 acts here by having, being assembled. If you can see like the sign here in the middle, I hope that's big enough for you to see, it says universal suffrage. And so they're not only petitioning against the Corn Laws, they're asking for everyone being able to vote. Then, that would accomplish their mission, because if all of them were able to vote, this parliament wouldn't be able to pass laws that only benefited the wealthy. It would be people voting to pass laws. Now, what they mean by universal suffrage at this time isn't just meant males. They're not liberal enough yet to think that women should have the right to vote, but all males should have the right to vote. What happens is police attack this group. You can see in the picture the police come in, they attack this group that's assembled and protesting. 11 people are killed and 400 are wounded, including 100 women. And so it's called a massacre. I mean, not like one of our biggest massacres, but I mean, I guess it's a massacre. These people were just assembled and meeting. During this time period, the press will be brought under control, and mass meetings abolished again. So there's that 6 acts again. So really trying to repress liberalism at this point. Remember, they are very anti-revolutionary. England's like, we don't want a revolution. Look at the French. We want evolution, like Burke. We want it slow and gradual. And so, in terms of conservatism for England at this time, by 1820, they're very scared of this liberal group, and they're going to squish them down. And they seem to be moving towards becoming a repressive, authoritarian state. And so we've talked about Germany, we've talked about Prussia and conservatism. Now we've talked about Britain and what's going on there. And then we're going to need to talk about France and Russia here moving forward, and how they react to conservatism or conservatism within them. And then we'll get into our next ism, liberalism. So France at this time period is going to begin as the most liberal large state in continental Europe. Why? They're the most liberal because we've just had the French Revolution. And so they're going to start out the most liberal. We're going to kind of follow through. So we're going to get the Charter of 1814. Is going to be given here, establishing a constitutional monarchy under King Louis the 18th, and it's really just a show of good faith under Louis the 18th, because it's going to give a bicameral legislature and keep the vote. They're going to realize, hey, some of you have gained power during the revolution. It's a show of good faith. We're going to get, 2 parts to our legislature, the Chamber of Deputies and the Chamber of Power. And so King Louis XVIII, who is a Bourbon, who has been restored to the throne after everything in the French Revolution, going to give this show of good faith. Remember, in 1795, Louis XVII had died in prison, so the son of Louis XVI. And Louis XVIII, remember we talked about him before, is the brother of Louis XVI, and remember, he came in, he's very old, his legs are disfigured, he's got gout, just from a poor lifestyle, alcohol, food, usually attacks the big toe first, and then your ankles, and then spreads to your joints, kind of like really bad arthritis. And so we have Louis XVIII, he's a Bourbon, he's been restored under this conservative era, given a show of good faith, and then we're going to get this time period, however, in 1815 called the White Terror. And it's really like the Reign of Terror, but it's the reverse. Like, it's a reaction to the Reign of Terror. White stands for the Bourbon family. And so in 1815, thousands of former revolutionaries, so those people who had been part of the French Revolution against the nobility and the crown, and those who had supported Napoleon, are going to be murdered by royalist mobs. And so this is the killing of revolutionaries. And I don't really think we have any proof that Louis XVIII really approved of this, but I mean, like, he literally and figuratively could not chase after them to stop them. But so we're going to have this White Terror, which is, the reverse of the Reign of Terror. And then in 1816, we're going to get some elections that restore moderate royalists to the legislature, restore them to power. We'll have the crushing of a Spanish Revolution in 1823, which will signal the triumph of conservatism. Remember, the British not really wanting this crush of the Spanish and leaving the Quadruple Alliance and all of that. But this signals the triumph of conservatism. In 1829, we'll get the heir to the throne being murdered. And the royalists then, as a reaction to this, are going to use the incident as a pretense to crack down on liberalism. So we start more liberal than any other state, but as things kind of get icky again and we have the heir to the throne killed, King Louis XVIII is going to shift from moderate policies to conservative ones, a reduction of suffrage or the right to vote, and he's also going to impose censorship again, like we saw in Britain, like we saw in Germany. And so he starts out more liberal, but we're going to see Louis XVIII moving much more conservative throughout his reign just due to a reaction of what's going on within France. So next we have Russia and the Decembrist uprising of 1825. So if you remember, our ruler of Russia, Tsar Alexander I, we talked about him in the Congress of Vienna. He gave us that weird Holy Alliance thing. So 1801 to 1825, he's actually going to initially favor enlightened despotism, but after 1815, he will grow increasingly reactionary. And what's reactionary, you need to know what that means. He's going to turn super conservative. And what being reactionary means is that someone tries to change things, you are going to beat them down. Like, you are going to beat them into submission. And so he becomes very reactionary. That's like in opposition to revolutionary. Revolutionaries want to change things. Reactionaries are going to beat down those people who are trying to change things. So he's actually going to die in this time period, and his death is going to lead to a power vacuum. And so, what that means is that his younger brother Nicholas was next in line to the throne, but the military and other peoples in Russia who have been exposed to these liberal ideas during the French Revolution are going to say, hey, maybe some of those ideas would be good for us. We don't think this one person should have all of this power, and we want change. Like, maybe a constitution would be good for us. Maybe some of these liberal ideas would be good. And so these militarists, these Decembrists, who are junior military officers, are upper-class opponents of the autocratic Russian system of government. So they begin to oppose Nicholas taking the throne, and they support popular grievances among Russian society. Like, they're like, yeah, like some of those ideas in the French that we were fighting might not have been so bad. Maybe they could work for us. And this is the first upper-class revolt against Russia's autocratic system of government. The first time that they've sought to prevent someone taking the throne. So they seek to prevent Nicholas I's assumption of the throne. But this revolt, Nicholas faces a problem. It's his own military that is going against him. So what's he going to do? He is going to suppress these uprisings by his people. And so what does he do? Being a reactionary monarch, he is going to send, like where people get sent at this time from Russia, he's going to send a lot of them to Siberia, and he is going to start executing people that are against him. So there's going to be like all of these hangings, these public executions, but what happens, it is so cold, remember Russian winter, that when they go to hang them, the ropes are actually so cold that they split. And like there's this huge sigh of relief, because the rule in Russia at this time was that if there was a botched execution, that means you get to go free. But what does Nicholas do as a reactionary? No, he orders new ropes, and he is going to hang these individuals again. And these will actually end up being some of our last public executions in Russia, because Nicholas, being Europe's most reactionary monarch, Russia is actually going to become a police state with censorship, a secret police. The third section in state-sponsored terrorism. There'll be no representative assemblies at this time in Russia. Education will be limited, so just like we saw in Germany with the universities being, heavily handed, university curriculum is going to be carefully monitored here in Russia, and it resulted in severe alienation of Russian intellectuals. And so we're going to, really be not only not allowing liberalism and nationalism, but stomping out, even intellectualism here. So intellectuals at this time are going to divide themselves into two groups as a reaction to Nicholas's reactionary ruling. And two opposing camps are going to form. The first one are the Slavophiles. Ophile means love in Russian. And so what this means is it's the love of the Slavs, and the Russians are Slavs. They believe that Russian village, the Mir, culture was superior to that of the West. They are going to say that we don't need liberal ideas, that we are better, we are superior, and that we should just keep promoting our Eastern ideals. Then the other group, the other camp that's going to form within intellectuals is called Westernizers, and that's going to be really easy to remember what they want. They wanted to extend the genius of the already existing Russian culture, so they're not saying that their culture is bad. They just want to extend it by industrializing and setting up a constitutional government. They want to mirror the West to show just how great Russian culture is. So they want to keep that Russian Eastern culture, but add to it with some of these westernizing ideas. And so we've seen how conservatism plays out, you know, in Germany and Prussia and Britain and France and now Russia. And so our next section is going to focus on liberalism, its characteristics, what liberalism means, and how that is going to play a role in each of these countries, as well as moving into our second chart in your study packet. So we've had our chart of conservatism, now we'll be moving into liberalism, and then your big chart at the end of your note packet is going to show all of these isms as we move through each country. So Unit 7.1, Part 2. We'll be moving into Part 3 next week.